Hello, everyone. Welcome to KTAL News Now. I'm your host, Anthony Macklin, and today is Friday, which means it is Football Friday here on the show, KTAL News Now, specifically in college football, where all the conference championship games are being played tomorrow on Saturday, and a little bit of them tonight ahead in the American Athletic Conference with Tulane and North Texas. So plenty of action to be seen, and be sure to preview all of those games and specifically the Power Four conference championships that are taking place tomorrow. And if you're new to the show, this is our daily live stream that goes live every day, Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. And we cover different topics throughout the week. We like to stick to certain themes. And today, since it is right in as we're getting closer and closer to the end of the college football season, it is now Football Friday here on KTAL News Now, but we're going to look ahead to last night's Thursday night game in the NFL between the Dallas Cowboys and the Detroit Lions. Now, Dallas is continuing to slide in this one. They are now 6-6-1. They had that tie earlier this year. I believe it was a 40-40 tie. It was the highest scoring tie in NFL history, which was pretty cool. It was also a scoregami for all of our scoregami fans out there, if you know what I'm talking about. But for the Detroit Lions, they picked up a much needed win after falling to the Packers last week on Thanksgiving. And they really, really are pushing for a playoff spot here in this one. And it'll be interesting to see if they can continue to do that and build on this momentum moving forward. But the first half of this game, it was pretty decently paced. There was a decent bit amount of scoring, not too crazy. Jahmyr Gibbs did have 3 touchdowns in this game, and his first one came in the first quarter where the Lions took a 10-3 lead. And then a Dallas field goal makes it 10-6. And then they ended up forcing a Lions punt, but then fumble on the ensuing possession, which then unfortunately results in a David Montgomery rushing touchdown for the Detroit Lions to go up 17-6 in this one. And they would end the half 20-9 going into halftime with that lead. And it was still a two-score game at that point, so it wasn't completely out of reach for Dallas. But in the second half, you had 29 points in the second half, but in the second half, that's when pretty much all of the scoring happened. You had 45 total points combined between these two teams in the second half, which is pretty crazy. And it could not have started worse for the Cowboys. Sorry to our Cowboys fans out there. If you were watching, I know this is very painful to go through again, but the very first play of the second half, the quarterback Dak Prescott throws an interception, and that unfortunately turns into a touchdown for the Lions 2 plays later, and they go up 27-9 at that point. So it looks like it was pretty out of reach for Dallas, but they would not quit as they rallied back with 2 touchdowns from Javonte Williams as well as Ryan Flournoy, and that put them within reach 30-27. So it was a 3-point game at that period, but it was not enough. They could not stop Detroit's offense in the end. And where Jahmyr Gibbs, like I said, he had 3 total touchdowns. He had 1 in that first quarter, like we mentioned, but then he had his other 2 both in the fourth quarter to put the game out of reach, and the Lions hung on to win 44-30 in this one. And as far as Detroit's defense go, they were absolutely everywhere. They had 5 sacks of Dak Prescott for the Cowboys. They had 2 interceptions off of him as well, and a fumble recovery, like I mentioned earlier, where they capitalized off of that and scored a touchdown. So it all came down to the turnovers, really, and scoring points off of those turnovers, because the Lions got touchdowns on almost all, if not every single time the Cowboys turned it over. So they were able to capitalize on that, which unfortunately Dallas put themselves in too much of a hole with those turnovers to ever truly recover from that deficit that they put themselves in. But Detroit is now 8-5. Like I said, they're pushing for a playoff spot, but they are still third in the NFC North behind the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, who they just lost to. So it's going to be really tough to pull out there. There's definitely no shot of them winning a division at this point, I don't think, barring a complete collapse from Chicago or Green Bay, because I believe they both have tiebreakers over those teams. So it's going to be really, really tough for Detroit to get at least a good playoff spot if they are vying to make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens. But Dallas, on the other hand, they're all but eliminated. I believe they were only given a 7% chance to make the playoffs at this point. So it's, if I'm a Cowboys fan, I'm pretty much looking forward to next season and see if you can make some improvements in the offseason, especially on the defense, because I know a lot of people were up in arms about Micah Parsons being traded in the offseason, right before the season, actually, in August. And that they just haven't recovered defensively since then. It's been pretty much a wet napkin out there for them. They can't really stop anything. You might as well put traffic cones out there to stop opposing offenses because they really have not been able to do much of anything. And that is very unfortunate because you had a franchise guy in Micah Parsons who was the anchor to your defense. He was the reason that you would be in these games, and he would single-handedly win you games in most cases. So the fact that they traded him, I know that's got to hurt, unfortunately, for Cowboys fans. So my condolences, but not really, because a lot of people like to hate the Cowboys, including myself. So I'm not sweating about it personally, but looking forward to the college football conference championship, specifically in the Big Ten. Now, on paper, bear with me now, this might be, the game to look out for, where you have number 2 Indiana and versus number 1 Ohio State, both 12-0 teams. They're both undefeated, but this might be the most least consequential number 1 versus number 2 game that I've personally ever seen in the history of college football, since I've been watching at least, because ever since the college football playoff expanded to 12 teams, there's really less consequences for losing, especially in big games like these in conference championships. Because as you saw a few years ago in the SEC championship, where it was Alabama versus Georgia, Georgia was undefeated. They were number 1 at the time. And then Alabama came in, beat them. And then Alabama got in. And then Georgia got knocked out. So there was the highest of stakes possible there for Georgia, where, as you could see, they lost. And then they were completely out and shut out from the college football playoffs. They had no chance of winning a championship despite being undefeated number 1 up until that point. And then one game just wiped that all away. They wiped away all of their championship aspirations because they lost. And this game is not going to be nearly the same thing, because no matter who wins this game, both of these teams are going to be in the college football playoff. Hell, most of them, I'd even argue and predict that both of them will still get first round buys. So what consequences are we even facing here when it comes to wanting to go in there and win? I mean, sure, a Big Ten title sounds nice. Sure, it's hardware for your school. Great. I guess it's a pride thing. But with the recent moving and relocating of all these teams to different conferences, these conferences have become way too big now. So there really isn't any stakes when it comes to this. Like it's so, and then the college football playoff as well, expanding to 12 teams. I mean, you already know that the number 1 and number 2, regardless of who wins, are both going to be in, because there's no way that either of them could slide so far out of the top 12 that they wouldn't be in the playoffs at all. That's just my gripes with the current format. I think it's probably the worst postseason format in all of sports at any level. I'd even go as far as to say that, because not only are you voting based on this bias that you have with all these conferences, and a lot of people like to look to SEC bias, which we'll get into a little bit later, but you have these teams, you have Indiana and Ohio State, they haven't even played like some of the top people in their conference. Like only one of them, I believe, has played Oregon. Neither of them, I think, have played USC. So it's like, what are we even doing? Like there's too many teams in the conference now. You're not getting a true Big Ten conference champion when you haven't even played most of the top dogs in your own conference. Like, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. That's just my personal feelings on the matter. I don't know how y'all feel about it. Y'all can email me at amocklin@ktalnews.com if you want to talk more about it. I have a lot to say, but if you don't agree with me, that's completely fine. You can voice your opinion in that email, like I said, at amocklin@ktalnews.com. But enough about the format. Let's get into the actual matchup, because this one, if you look on paper, if you ignore all the playoff stuff, the actual matchup, I think, will be a very, very good one still, regardless of the consequences and the outcomes of the implications with the playoff, because this is the first time since 2009 that the 2 top-ranked teams have met in a conference championship. And the last time that was done was in the SEC when in 2008 and '09, whenever Florida and Alabama went back to back in the title game with each other. And the OSU, Ohio State, I know people like to say Oklahoma State, but whatever. I'm just going to use OSU for brevity here. But they are looking to rewrite history here because they have missed the last 4 Big Ten championship games. And that coincidentally coincided with their 4-game losing streak to Michigan toward the end of the regular season the last 4 years. But this year they ended up beating them. They got that monkey off their back, if you want to say. And they finally said, enough's enough. We're back. They were the national champions last year, and they're trying to repeat this year, which could be a concern in this game because they might be looking ahead to that because, as I previously mentioned, if they lose this game, they're still in. They'll still likely get a bye. I'm telling you, if either of these teams wins by like 3 or like a possession, I don't see them falling more than a spot or 2, if that. So I think they'll both still get buys no matter what happens here. And Ohio State, they might be looking ahead to repeat. Like I was saying, they might not be too worried about this game, although they might want to try to get that Big Ten title again under their belt because it has been a long time for them in the grand scheme of Ohio State and their storied history. They have several national championships and Big Ten titles. So they're trying to add to their hardware. I get it, but they might be looking ahead to the bigger piece of hardware, which is the national championship. So we'll see. These are very evenly matched teams in terms of both sides of the ball, where if you look at Ohio State, they are first in total defense and then 24th in total offense. So top 25 in both of those categories. And their offense is led by quarterback Julian Sayin, who is a Heisman candidate, along with Indiana's quarterback, who we'll get to in a second. But Julian Sayin has thrown for over 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions. So he has been super efficient. And then Indiana, on the other hand, they just had their first undefeated regular season in program history. And this has been a long time coming for them because their last Big Ten title was in 1967. So it has been almost 60 years since their last conference title. So they're probably itching. They're probably hungry to get this title under their belt and end that drought. And their success the last 2 seasons has largely been due to head coach Curt Cignetti. And if you look at last year, he revolutionized that program because he won the National Coach of the Year award as well as the Big Ten Coach of the Year. He led them to a record 11 wins last year and a college football playoff appearance. And he was back-to-back Big Ten Coach of the Year again this year. And then they just signed him to an 8-year extension in October. So he's going to be there for the foreseeable future. I expect Indiana to be on the national stage when it comes to competing with these top dogs like Ohio State every year, as they were previously viewed as the laughingstock of the conference and just college football as a whole. I believe up until recently, they were the losingest college football program in the country, which is pretty hard to believe considering their success the last few years. But we'll see if they can build upon that with Cignetti and hopefully get a title under his belt, at least a conference title to end that drought since 1967. That's pretty hard to believe. But Indiana, in terms of statistics this year, their defense is 4th in total defense, and then their offense is 5th in total offense, and that is largely thanks to Fernando Mendoza, who a lot of people think is the Heisman favorite. He is their quarterback. He's been their quarterback all year. He's accounted for over 3,000 total yards, 38 total touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So he has been absolutely elite all year. Very efficient, just like Julian Sayin for Ohio State. So I am really looking forward to this quarterback matchup to see who outduels the other. It's going to be really awesome to see, despite the implications with the playoff and everything. I still think it's going to be a very great matchup, regardless of who wins. But if you look at resumes in regards to the college football playoff and who deserves to be higher ranked or whoever, because Indiana right now is 2nd. Indiana, if you look at their resume, they have the most impressive win out of the 2 teams. They did beat Oregon earlier this year, who was then number 3 at the time. I believe they're number 5 right now. So if you have beaten a top 5 team at this point, it says a lot about your program and your season and just what you're made of, because my money would be on Indiana being able to get in here and win, because like I said, there's a lot of factors at play with Ohio State, they might be looking ahead to a national championship. They might not be too concerned with this. Plus, they're coming off of their finally getting a win at Michigan after ending that streak. So I think this is a game that Indiana definitely could win, at least keep it close. The spread right now is 4.5 points. Ohio State is the favorite, but I like Indiana to cover here if I had to pick because of everything I mentioned. And I think that if you had to pick a national champion who I think is probably going to win the national championship, I would probably say Ohio State. But if I'm taking this game specifically with all of the factors that I mentioned, I like Indiana to at least keep it close in this one. Give me the points in this one. But looking ahead to the Big 12 Conference Championship, we have number 11 BYU taking on number 4 Texas Tech. Now, a lot of people have already written off this game as Texas Tech is a huge favorite in this one. It's pretty much a lock for them to make the playoffs regardless if they lose or not. Because even if they lose to BYU here, you can say that you lost to the number 11 team and you'll still won't fall below them, I don't think. They'll still be in the top 10 if I had to guess. Maybe even number 7 or something like that. But BYU, they have a lot to play for. Texas Tech, they really don't have, like I said, the way the implications are set up right here, there's not a whole lot to play for when it comes to Texas Tech because you're in no matter what, whereas BYU, if you lose, you're probably out, unfortunately. So the Cougars are probably going to go in here giving everything they got. But Texas Tech, if you look at earlier this season, just 4 weeks ago, they played each other, and Texas Tech absolutely demolished them 29-7. BYU really could not do anything offensively, and I would expect more of the same here, unfortunately. But if you look at the history with these programs, Texas Tech, this is their first ever Big 12 championship game appearance, which I did not know that. That is pretty remarkable. I could have sworn they've been here before, but I guess not. But this is also the first for BYU since joining the conference in 2023. Previously, they were an independent like Notre Dame, so they weren't in any conference for a good bit, but they recently joined the Big 12 and are now competing in the championship title game in just their second season. So, or second or third season, sorry. So the fact that they could do that and compete with the big dogs in this conference is pretty impressive. Credit to BYU, but I think unfortunately the road for them ends here. If you're a BYU fan, I'm not trying to hate or anything, but I just think Texas Tech, if you look at the previous matchup, I mean, it just wasn't even a contest. Like, they had College Game Day there. It was so hyped, but then it ended up being like they ran BYU off the field, unfortunately. But even like in that game where they dominated, Texas Tech still did not play the best they could. They still won by 3 scores, sure, but they really could have capitalized a lot more especially in the red zone because they settled for a lot of field goals. So it could have been even uglier. So I think it'll still be more of the same. Plus, this game is in AT&T Stadium or Jerry World in Arlington. It's pretty much going to be a home game for Texas Tech here. So I like them to cover the spread. They're favored by 12.5 points. So I think they win pretty comfortably here, unfortunately, for our BYU fans if they're out there. But looking ahead to the SEC, now this one has a lot more implications when it comes to playoff potential and seeding because you have number 3 Georgia taking on number 9 Alabama. Now, if you look at the history between these programs, it has not been pretty for head coach Kirby Smart with Georgia. He is just 1-7 against Alabama in his career since taking over the Georgia Bulldogs, and it's been pretty rough. And earlier this season, Alabama did end up winning 24-21 in Georgia in Athens, and it ended their 33-game home winning streak, which was dated back almost 6 years ago. They had never lost at home in that time period, and Alabama came in there and ended it. So I think it could be more of the same here. Unfortunately, I just don't think that Georgia can get over that hump when it comes to beating Alabama. Sure, they won a pair of national titles and everything, but in those seasons, they did not have to go through Alabama to get them. And that one win that I talked about where Kirby Smart is 1-7, it did come in the national championship. That is their last win against Alabama in 2021 with the national championship. It's a long time for them to come and try to get over that hump again. and especially on this big of a stage again. It's going to be really, really tough. It is in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. So it is still in the state of Georgia, but it's technically a neutral site. And the fact that Alabama came into Georgia's stadium in Athens and won, it really doesn't bode well for Georgia, despite being in Atlanta with a pseudo home game, if you will. But it's going to be really tough for them. Bama and Georgia, if you look at the SEC as a whole, in the last 12 years, those teams have accounted for 11 of the last 12 SEC champions. So it just goes to show you how dominant of a run these programs have been on in the conference. And in that time frame, this is their fourth matchup in the SEC title game. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see who comes out on top here, because they're a tale of two teams. Because when it comes to Georgia's offense, they have looked better than Alabama's, but albeit against worse defenses than Alabama has played. And that's largely thanks to quarterback Gunnar Stockton for Georgia, who was accounted for almost 3,000 total yards, 28 total touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So, again, really super efficient quarterback play in this one. And Georgia, I think, has the better ground game. Their running back, Nate Frazier, has over 300 more yards than Alabama's top running back, Jam Miller. They really aren't. That's not really their identity. They don't have like a true bell cow back. They've been a mixed bag when it comes to who gets the rock behind in the backfield with Alabama. But Bama, on the other hand, their defense has looked better than Georgia's, albeit against worse offenses. So Ty Simpson for Georgia, their quarterback, he has been pretty stellar as well. He's accounted for over 3,000 passing yards, 25 passing touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. So it all comes down to quarterback play at the end of the day in this game. I think that Bama's defense will be able to hold them in check, kind of, maybe, just like they did earlier in the regular season. And there's a lot of implications here when it comes to seeding and if who gets in or who doesn't get in. Because if Georgia wins, they almost certainly get a bye in the first round. And Bama would then have 3 losses on the season, so they're likely out. And I don't really see them putting in a 3-loss team in the college football playoff. I could be wrong with the SEC bias, like I mentioned before, and Alabama just getting in off the brand name that happened a few years back whenever Florida State was undefeated, but then they lost their quarterback, and then Alabama got in over them. It was just a very tough situation. I thought Florida State would have at least gotten a chance to compete, but I guess the committee didn't see it that way. But Georgia was a 2.5-point favorite in that game earlier in the regular season, and the spread is the exact same here. And this time they are in a neutral site in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but I don't know. I don't want to bet against Alabama as much as I don't like them, being an LSU fan. I hate to get a bet against them here, especially if you look at the track record. Kirby Smart is 1-7 against this team, and I unfortunately don't think that will change here. I think even with a Georgia loss, they'll still absolutely make it in. So I wouldn't sweat it too hard if you are a Georgia fan, but I think Alabama comes out on top in this one. But looking ahead to the SEC, now this one has the most implications when it comes to playoffs. There could be some pure chaos that happens in this one depending on who wins. And I'm talking about unranked Duke versus number 17 Virginia. Now, this is a rematch where they played just 3 weeks ago, where Virginia absolutely dominated in this game. They won 34-17 and held Duke to just 42 rushing yards for the entire game. That's absolutely absurd. And you can't do anything if you don't establish the run. I know a lot of people like to say that. It's kind of like a cliche. You need to establish the run, but it really reigns true, and it absolutely showed in that game because Duke could not move the ball like they normally do. They had season lows across the board offensively, and that's largely because they could not get the ground game rolling. But if Virginia wins, they're definitely in, I would say. I think they're pretty safe if they come out with a win here. But if Duke wins, oh my goodness, there could be a whole domino effect when it comes to this, because if Duke wins, they are unranked and they would be 8-5. You're not going to put a 5-loss team in the playoffs. So the ACC could be knocked out entirely from the playoffs. Like it could just be every other conference essentially besides them. And the reason for this is because Virginia is already number 17. They're already kind of on the outside looking in, although if they do win this game, they would be the ACC champions. So you would kind of have to put them in. But then you have number 12 Miami on the outside, kind of lurking, where they did beat Notre Dame in one of the first games of the season. And the fact that people are trying to put Notre Dame in over Miami is a whole different conversation because Miami absolutely deserves to be in. They literally beat Notre Dame earlier this year. So the fact that they could be on the outs is pretty crazy. And if Duke wins, I think that is almost a certainty because then you have the craziest shakeup in the ACC where they might not even get a team that makes the playoffs. Because as of now, number 12 Miami is the highest ranked team in the conference. And the way it works with the new playoff format, usually an automatic playoff bid is given to the 5 highest ranked league champions, and that is primarily with the first 4 being the Power 4 conferences, which is the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, and SEC. But then the 5th team is usually a mix, or it's chosen from a group of the AAC, which is the American Athletic Conference. You have Conference USA, the Mid-American Conference, the Mountain West, and then the Sun Belt. So it's usually going to be the 5th team that gets an automatic, no matter what bid, is going to be from one of those 5 conferences. And the reason Duke is here, like I mentioned, they have 5 losses, and you might be wondering how the heck are they in the ACC championship game? It's because they went 6-2 in conference play, and they had this crazy 5-team tiebreaker where they needed an exact order of things to happen to give them a slight edge when it came to strength of schedule to put them in over the other 4 teams that were also 6-2 in conference play. So it took a crazy universe altering kind of, the stars had to align, but they're here. I don't think they win at all in this game, but it's crazy that they are here. And if you look at the previous history of the ACC, Clemson historically in the last decade or so has absolutely dominated the conference. They have won the ACC championship game in 8 of the last 10 seasons. But if you looked at them at all this season, you know that they were a shell of themselves and their former glory. They had back-to-back conference losses to open up conference play. So right from there, they were pretty much eliminated from ever even coming close to this game this year. But one thing that I found interesting when it came to the preseason predictions, Duke was actually picked 6th to finish in the ACC, whereas Virginia was picked just 14th in the conference. That's near dead last in the conference. And the fact that they are here, they are 10-2, and they are in the conference championship game in prime position to win the title is pretty remarkable. They actually just won their first ever regular season championship outright of anybody. They had the best record in the ACC this year, and they absolutely deserve to be here. And I think they do end up winning this game to hold off any chaos that might ensue if Duke wins. But just know that that is the more exciting outcome if that does happen, because you'll have people scrambling to say, oh, my team deserves to be in. Oh, we need to put this team in. You can't put Duke in here, blah, blah, blah. But it's going to be a crazy outcome regardless. And Virginia, they are favored by 4 in this game. And their defense, I think, will be able to do this much of the same thing as they did earlier this year, where they held Duke to 17 points. Their defense and their pass rush specifically is averaging 2.5 sacks per game, and I think they can definitely get some pressure on Duke. And Duke, if you look at their last 6 games, they really have not looked up to par. They went 3-3 in those games, so they split those 6 games. But then in that time frame, they were giving up over 33 points per game to their opponents. So I don't see them stopping Virginia here. I think that continues where Virginia will be able to gash them any way they want. And the spread is 4 points. And I get Vegas knows stuff and knows more than we do. But 4 points, it's just too small of a line in my opinion. So I'm going to go with Virginia here. And that's all I have today for episode of Football Friday. Be sure to tune in the rest of the time next week on KTAL News Now, where we will be covering the recap on the weekend recap on Monday, and then followed by Tech Tuesday, Wellness Wednesday, and then weekend events on Thursday, followed by another edition of Football Friday as the conference championships conclude and we have a full set playoffs to see and matchups to preview. But I hope you have a great rest of your day. Be sure to tune in on our website at ktalnews.com, which is where we stream every day, Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. And you can also get all of your local breaking and trending topics on our website at ktalnews.com. But for now, I'm Anthony Mocklin. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.